What up, Unstoppable? So we are in Wilmington, Delaware, about to roll into our interview with Tom Sterner. And Tom is the author of It's Just a Thought in The Practicing Mind. He's also got a book called Fully Engaged. Tom was put on my radar by Sam Caiucci. Sam Caiucci is the CEO of One Huddle. One Huddle is a training software. Essentially, what I love about One Huddle is they're really leaning into the human variable, human factors, and reverse engineering human behavior and injecting that into software, training software. And he put me in touch with Tom saying, if this is your jam, if human behavior is your jam and understanding reverse engineering the human element, then you've got to talk to Tom. And Tom specializes in just basically the power of thought and just being aware and consciousness, essentially. And there's a gap between the unconscious mind and the conscious mind, where you can override the unconscious mind, and he teaches you how to live there, how to find this gap, how to live intentionally, how to think intentionally, and to not let your thoughts control you, but to have the observer control the situation. And the observer is you, the third perspective, the part of your mind that's the outside looking in. So what we're going to talk about today is hopefully how to live in that space of the observer. And honestly, after reading his books, it's influenced me. It's been too soon for it to have an effect on my life, but it's definitely influenced me because I'm somebody who has always had this inner dialogue that I'm not good at the attention to detail and stuff. I'm not a technician. I've never been the person that's an academic. I've always had the big picture. I've always been doing relationships, but I think that it's important to be aware of what you're telling yourself you're not, because you're going to limit yourself, and that's the subconscious mind talking to you, the beliefs. So the other variable too is whatever you believe about yourself is going to hold you back to trying new things. So for example, one thing I want to be better about is the world of videography and video editing. But when you think about these big mountains you have to get over, what ends up happening is you get anxious. You never take the leap because you're afraid of the work you have to do or the inevitable failure you might come up against. But that's just a thought. That's just narrative. It's not reality. It's not your thoughts don't control you. So it helped me kind of get real and vulnerable with myself. And after reading these books, I took the jump off the cliff and I purchased some courses to do some video editing, and I've started, and I've committed to doing a couple hours every night before going to bed instead of watching TV. I'm using that time to learn, to grow. And one lesson that he leaves you with is wherever you are in your journey, whatever you're practicing, whether that be learning how to golf or video editing, wherever you are in your journey is exactly where you're supposed to be. So don't compare yourself to the goal. Compare yourself to where you were and the progress you're making, and know that where you are right now is exactly where you're supposed to be. I'm sure we're going to unpackage more of this during the interview, but I'm really excited to get into the power of just mindset. And behind every great restaurant is a great person. The journey to having a great restaurant starts with you and getting control of your consciousness and living intentionally, and it all starts here.
This episode is brought to you by Restaurant Systems Pro. With excitement, allow me to introduce to you today's guest, CEO of the Practicing Mind Institute and author of The Practicing Mind, Fully Engaged, and It's Just a Thought, Thomas M. Sterner. My man, Thomas, are you feeling unstoppable today?
I'm feeling unstoppable, Eric. Thanks for having me on.
I am feeling unstoppable, man. I made it a rule that if I ever get anybody on the show, I want to read their books. I want to do the respect of reading their books and becoming familiar with it. And I have to say that your books, not only did I enjoy them, like they are influencing me. They are encouraging me to take leaps that I've been putting off because of fear and anxiety, or just an inner dialogue that I'm not good enough, or that I'm not good at that, and that I will. And I, after reading your books, know that that's my inner dialogue. That's the inner voice, the thoughts. It's not the third person perspective. It's not the true me. And just taking a step back and just having that knowledge has been so powerful. And I'm sure we're going to get into a lot of amazing stuff, but I'm super excited. I do want to give One Huddle a nod. Sam Caiucci put you on my radar, and what they're doing over there, really getting into the human variables, the human element, reverse engineering the human element into their software is impressive. I know you know Sam.
I know Sam. He's an amazing human being and one of my favorite. He's really out there from a humanistic standpoint. He's really working to make work conditions better, to appreciate people for what they have to offer now and what their potential is. I think he's incredible.
Yeah, and if you guys are not familiar with One Huddle, it's a training platform that uses a lot of what Tom teaches, this idea of just like repetition and practice and learning mode versus performance mode, and just really trying to bake in what we're learning about the human variable into their software. It's a company I'm really excited about. I'm super excited to have them as a sponsor as well. Just a little nod to those folks. But before we dive into who you are and what your books are all about, let's get that motivational, inspirational, ball rolling with a success quote or mantra. What do you got for us?
My mantra is, I am not my thoughts. Some thoughts I create, but most of my thoughts happen to me unless I'm in charge of the process.
What do you mean by I am not my thoughts? I think people would listen to that and be like, what do you mean? Like, your thoughts are...
Well, most people spend their day being thought by their subconscious rather than actually being the creator of their thoughts. So, many times when something is happening to you, let's say you're feeling anxious, if I was to ask you, if you could stop this thought right now, would you choose to do that? And everybody says yes. Well, that's because your thought is happening to you. It isn't you. You're really outside of the thought, but the thought is happening to you. And because you're unaware of that, you're actually in the emotional content of the thought. So you're not the thinker of the thought, you're being thought. And, neuroscience has told us that about 95% of the day, this is where we live. Stimulus happens outside of us. Our subconscious has a recorded response for that circumstance. And what it's really looking at is the way that the subconscious works is it is an elegant recording system, but it doesn't think, it doesn't have a sense of humor, and it doesn't care how the program that it runs makes you feel. It just basically encodes information from the way you feel about a certain situation. So if somebody walks in the room and says something nasty to you, and you have this feeling, and the subconscious correlates, when this type of a thing happens, this is the feeling that you want to have, and it records that. And as you repeat that over and over again, it becomes an ingrained behavior. And so then as the day goes on and you're being stimulated all day long by what you hear, what you see, the subconscious, which is 1,000,000 times faster than your conscious mind, which it needs to be, it just goes and gets file number, A32 and plays it for whatever just happened in front of you. And as it plays it, it puts those thoughts into your brain, and then the feelings are recreated, and then you experience the situation the same. You're basically just a slave to the process without even knowing it.
I've got this analogy popping into my mind listening to you talk, and it sounds like, to paint the picture for our restaurant operators, like your inner conscious is your operations manual. It's the systems, processes, and procedures that are automated that you do every day, and it's just kind of there in the background. And then you have your frontal lobe, which is the part of your mind that can override that, the executive suite, right? That does the visioning, the planning, the strategic, and it can override and change the standard operating procedures with routine and habit, right, and practice.
Right. It looks at anything. Why do we have habits in the first place? Well, habits are very efficient from a brain capacity, from a cognitive point of view, because there's no decision making and really no thinking in them. It's just a file that gets run. So the brain is always looking for, what are you repeating? And again, it doesn't think, so it's not making any kind of a judgment. It just looks at what behavior, how do you behave in certain situations, and when you repeat a certain behavior, whether that's reaching for a snack at 3 o'clock or having a cup of coffee at 10, or when that person comes in the room, you bristle, whatever it is, it looks at that and it says, well, if I convert this into a habit, then that frees up RAM, in the brain, and so it looks for that, and we need that because we don't need to learn how to walk again or button our shirt. We need habits. That's what it figures it out, and then it stores it on the hard drive, and then it's there forever.
So why is it important for why is it like baked into us to create habit? What's the benefit of that?
It frees up cognitive space in the brain. In other words, if you think about it, the first time you do something, it takes all of your thought. Like when you're learning to drive a car, like if you're learning to, swing a golf club, like you can't be thinking about lunch, like when you're doing that, it takes all of your attention. But the more proficient you get at it, it becomes harder to pay attention.
Yeah.
Because it has been automated. As much of it as can be has been automated, and the reason for that is survival. I mean, that's really what it goes back to. You can't be learning what to do if you're a lion, or I should say, like if you're a gazelle, you can't be learning what do I do when a lion shows up. Every time a lion shows up.
You need to react. You need to get your butt out.
That's right. So what happens is the subconscious teaches that this is what you do when this happens. And again, it's way, way faster than our conscious mind. That's the reason why, if you touch a hot stove, you don't have to think about move my arm, bend my elbow. The subconscious just jumps in and makes the reaction happen.
And this is happening in the most primitive part of your mind, the core of
Right.
your mind. The mind evolved from the inside out, which is kind of cool to think about. But I know from my studies of Power Habit, Atomic Habits, that also it's just a huge energy suck. Your brain is a giant energy suck, and if you can create habit, then your brain doesn't have to. You
work
don't
so
realize
hard.
how much
Yeah.
energy we use with our brain.
Right.
It saves energy.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's everything. It's like all of your cognitive faculties get freed up.
Yeah.
Like as soon as it can convert it to a habit.
Yeah.
So it's a very necessary. It's a really necessary
Conservation.
faculty to have. The problem is that because we are unaware that it is in control, we're being controlled by it.
Yeah.
It's running all the time, 24/7.
We're going to get into that, and I wanted to start getting your backstory in sooner, but I know I'm going to be lost in conversation with you today, man, because I'm really passionate about this stuff. But what makes you an expert in this subject? Like, how did you get to where you are today with being a known authority on this matter?
Well, probably the best part was that I was a victim of myself, with all this stuff. I was completely undisciplined. I was unaware of why I behaved the way I did. I was, fortunately, observer-oriented, meaning I was aware that I had behaviors, and I watched them, and the behaviors didn't make me happy, and I felt, and this is, by the time I was a senior in high school, I realized that I was not fulfilling my potential. I wasn't finishing goals that I started, and it really bothered me.
Were you diagnosed ADD or anything like that?
No.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I that wasn't a problem, but what I found, I was late. One, I was undisciplined and lazy. I mean, it was like I wanted everything that came from practice. I just didn't feel like practicing, and that was a question that just rang in me. Like, why do I resist practicing? What is it about it that I don't want to do? Like, why do I try to dodge it? When I want everything, I want all the benefits of it. And I was always very inquisitive. I was a deep thinker, and so I think things turned for me when I realized by senior in high school that I had to do something, but I didn't have any idea what to do or where to start. I just had, like my father used to say, identify the problem and fix it. So I had identified the problem. And then when I got in college, a really close friend of mine had taken a Philosophies of the World course, and he gave me his book. He said, I think you'd like this. And I just devoured it. I had been raised in traditional Western religions, and I didn't know anything about Eastern religions. And so when I began to read about Zen mind and all that sort of stuff, it just made a lot of sense to me. And I began to meditate, and I began applying that perspective to everything I did, and my whole life changed. I became very present moment oriented, and the meditation helped me to recognize when I wasn't in the present moment, and I began to hone this skill. And as that happened, I just couldn't get enough information. I studied all the Eastern works, and then I got into sports psychology, and neuroscience really wasn't around much at that time. It certainly hadn't coalesced into its present form. And
why was sports psychology intriguing to you? What was the connection with sports psychology?
Well, if you look at something like golf, because sports psychology was very big in golf, because unlike golf is not a reactionary sport. In baseball, the pitcher throws the ball, and you got to swing it.
No one's trying to sack you.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
In golf, the ball just sits there, and it doesn't care how long you wait. So there's a lot of time for the mind to get in the way of the swing. And the swing happens internally first. The movement outside the body is the caboose on the train. So if you can teach somebody what a perfect swing is, why can't they repeat it all the time? And they had already exhausted everything like nutrition and all that sort of stuff. So they knew that the missing link was the mind. The final frontier for performance was the mind. And even today we haven't mastered it because, not to mention the guy's name, but one of the guys very highly ranked in the world, recently was in the Masters tournament, and he brought his sports psychologist and everything, with him, and he missed the cut, and he had won like a week or so before that, and so you have this variance in performance. Like in one week they're at the absolute top of the game and they're able to make their mind do everything that they want, and the next week they're
Maybe
just
they had
a fail.
a bad fight, and they're just not there like consciously.
Right, they're not there consciously. So what is the mystery here? And that's how do we improve that? And that's why there's been tremendous amounts of money that has been spent in trying to understand this. So sports psychology really was the child of that. Like there's a lot of money involved in sports. There's a lot of money to be had. And so it was worth it to spend a lot of money on research to get to the performance level so you could win more.
Yeah.
And so that was why it was developed, and that was the next step for me.
So I want to throw a little context in here because I think some of our listeners might be like, what the hell is Eric doing getting somebody on the show all about the mind? Like, if you don't think this is associated with business and performance, and you're talking about top top performing athletes using the science, implementing the science into their lives, and our businesses is just a practice. Your menu is a practice. Your standards of service is a practice. Everything we do in our business is a practice, and it all starts with discipline. Right? And you can't expect anybody on your team to show up to your business a different way, better than you, right? So I think it all starts with the owner and understanding this stuff and being the leader and leading through example and sharing these lessons on discipline. What's going through your mind?
Well, what's going through my mind is if you're not aware of what you're thinking, then you're not in control.
Yeah.
And I did an experiment one time with high school kids, and I asked them I said, I'm going to set a timer for 2 minutes. I want you to stop thinking. Close your eyes and stop thinking. Well, I knew that they couldn't do that, but they didn't know. It had never occurred to them that they couldn't do that. And, of course, their minds are overstimulated by their smartphones and all that sort of stuff. So at the end of 2 minutes, the ringer goes off, and these kids are it's an epiphany. And I said to them, was anybody able to stop their mind? And they said, no, I was everywhere. I was in the cafeteria and thinking about, this report I have to do. And I said, yeah, so if you're using your will and you're telling your mind, stop thinking, and your mind is saying, no, I'm going to think anyway, then who's in charge? Because it's not you.
Right.
And so most people live their day not actually in charge of what's going on in their head. And you can't be in charge of it. You can't improve that unless you're aware of it. And that's why, at one time I had a presentation called 5% Thinking, which is the amount of time that the neuroscientists say that we're actually critically thinking and composing our thoughts. So, can we get that number up to 20 to 25%? That would we'd be like geniuses,
Right.
So, to me, I think it's really important that people understand that they are outside of their thinking.
Yeah.
And going to what you were saying, about in the restaurant business, there was a chapter in Fully Engaged which was create your goals with accurate data. And when I started writing my book, I had a very successful 6-figure service business, and I walked away from it, and everybody thought I was crazy. I mean, it had taken me several decades to build, and I had a 3.5-year waiting list for my work, and I walked away from that to publish The Practicing Mind. And
I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit. I mean, the practice, the service that you provided was maintenance and refurbishment of grand pianos, and this is a very disciplined.
It was very
skill.
disciplined, and I worked for most of the major world artists in classical music and country, western, and jazz, and so I was a very high-level technician as that goes, which is very disciplined. And as a side tangent, it was a very good incubator for what I was trying to understand about my mind, because what people don't realize about a piano is that it's extremely monotonous because there's 88 notes. So everything you do to that instrument, you have to do at least 88 times. If you go in and you're going to adjust the keyboard on a grand piano, well, there's 5,000 parts and there's 34 adjustments per note, and you got to go through that process, and you have to maintain the same discipline and focus on the first note as you do on the 88th note. So it is very demanding from your mind, and you're working in solitude all day long. So you don't have, and you really have to develop, which is one of the reasons I was putting all this effort into this, was how do I stop this from feeling, my interpretation feeling like this is terrible. I don't feel like doing this. I'm impatient. I was having those feelings, and I was like, can I interpret this experience different? Is there a way to do that? And I think that's very, very relevant to any job. Because you could be in work and you just, I just can't wait till I get home because I'm going out with my friends or whatever it is. Like, you cannot be present in the moment, and to learn to recognize that and be able to pull your mind back into the present and be completely focused and content in what you're doing right here and now is a huge thing. But going back to that, when I sold the business, I didn't have accurate data on how long it was going to take me to be successful. So I had this crazy idea that, well, there's hundreds of millions of people on the internet every day, and if I put this book on Amazon and I have a website, I should be rolling in money. I was so naive, it never occurred to me that nobody knew who I was, so they couldn't search me, and nobody knew the title of the book either, so they couldn't search that. So it wasn't showing up, and I was making about $17 a week on book sales, and I was hemorrhaging money. Which was okay because I was cash rich, because I had sold several business properties and $100,000 in tools, client base, and all this stuff. So I had a lot of cash on hand, but I could see this wasn't going to have a happy ending if this continued. So, my point is, like, well, how did I deal with that? Well, the way I dealt with it was, I wasn't in my thoughts. I was noticing the thoughts, but the thoughts were anxious. But I realized that I was not the thought, so I had a choice as to whether I allowed. I'm the gatekeeper of my thoughts. I had the choice as to whether I allowed that to go. Now, I also have a pilot's license, and I can tell you that this is training in pilot's license. When you're pilots, you don't. When the engine quits, you've already made decisions before in a calm time on the ground. What are you going to do if this happens? And you just move into that behavior.
What are you going to do?
Well, there's a checklist, that you would go through. But my point is, I developed that in clients. It's like, look, if there's a situation that triggers you, and you could do whatever you wanted when that happens.
But there's power in this, because I was a commercial pilot, so like even just you referencing that, the idea of practice, the power of practice, when you're training with your flight instructor and they just pull the throttle back and your engine died, like, what are you going to do? They do it all the time.
Right.
It just becomes the first thing you're going to do is, where am I going to land?
Right.
Get my
Aviate,
airspeed.
navigate, communicate.
Yeah, exactly. And like, where am I going to land? What's my airspeed? And then from there, it's like, okay, what would make the engine go off?
Right.
So you start looking like fuel and like it's just all like mixture, fuel, tank, like all this, like fuel pump, all these things, but you don't think about it. And this was almost 12 years for me, and I just literally went through and I did it because of the power of practice.
Well, what you're talking about, Eric, is the difference between a reaction and a response.
Yeah.
A reaction just happens and it's whatever you do.
Yeah.
A response has willpower and decision making in it. So in other words, you made this decision before that happened. What am I going to do if this happens?
Yeah.
And I say this all. That's why we call them first responders and not first reactors. They know what they're going to do at the scene of the accident when they get there. Well, if you're in a work environment, do you know what you're going to do if this situation happens? If you made that decision before the situation, especially the things that are repetitive, do you know what you're going to do if you're having a certain feeling, like, I don't feel like doing this, or this person's annoying me? Like, do you have some idea, like, well, what am I going to do when that feeling shows up? Like, am I going to be in control, or am I just going to be in the feeling? And reacting to it.
Like, you don't have a happy guess. Like, what are you going to do? Like, oh, you make it right. You offer something. Like, instantly, it's not like, oh, I'm sorry. It's like, okay, how do I write the end of the story? How do I provide some kind of value to get you back onto a good experience, right? But you got to train people. This isn't common sense. You started talking about the fully engaged. I think fully engaged. You made a reference to that book. I don't know if you ever came back to it when you're talking in terms of restaurants.
Yes, I was saying that because I didn't have accurate data when I chose my goal, which was to publish this book and become a successful author, things started happening that I wasn't prepared for. Because I had made a decision, this is what we normally do when we create a goal. We set a goal, and then we come up with some arbitrary time that makes sense to us, even though we don't have any really information telling us that that's an accurate amount of time. So a good example of that demonstrates that would be, I want to lose 30 pounds. That should take 4 days. Now, we know that's absurd, but that's only because we know it's absurd. But if we do that with other things, then what is going to be what is going to happen next? Well, we're going to very quickly not be making our goal, and there's going to be negative self-talk, and we're going to be discouraged, and we're going to lose our confidence and feel that we're not good at fulfilling these goals. Now, you may actually be very far along in the process of filling the goal. You just don't know it because you have the wrong information. You don't have accurate data. And you brought a point up in the last segment there that I just want to jump on. It's a quick story from Fully Engaged, which was when I was a concert technician. There was an incident that I wrote about, and you talked about a customer who isn't happy. Well, I had customers. I had customers because I was a concert technician. I had to please these sometimes very finicky artists. And there was an artist that came into one of the concert halls that I served, and that artist, unbeknownst to me at the time, had an alcohol problem, had a habit of having big mood swings. So what happened was they had stored the concert grant. He was playing a concert by himself, so there was no orchestra. It was just him sitting at the piano, and it was a difficult program. And the piano, because they had other shows in there, they didn't just have classical stuff. They had ballet and Broadway stuff and pop artists and everything. When they weren't using this 9-foot piano, they would put it under the stage, and it was very humid. The piano, piano is wood and felt, and it gets messed up pretty quickly when it's not in a stabilized environment. So what happened was the piano got cacophonious. I mean, it's totally out of tune. The touch was all out of what, this note was easier to push than that note. And so the procedure was to pull the piano out the day before and let it acclimate to the room. And then I would come in and spend about 5 or 6 hours on it before the artist ever saw it. Well, because of some misunderstanding and miscommunication, there was a young stage manager or stagehand who didn't know the process or the protocol. And the artist came over on Saturday morning, and the piano hadn't been touched, and he let him in to play it. Now, here's the point of the story. This guy was outraged. I mean, he was outraged, and he was calling me every name in the book. So this stagehand calls me at home and says, "What am I supposed to do?" Well, my first reaction was, man, you just threw me down a rabbit hole that it's going to be pretty hard to get out, because now this guy has made his mind up that I hate this instrument and I don't want to perform on it, and your piano technician is an idiot because he's thinking that I've been taking care of this piano and this is how I've left it
for him, yeah.
So anyway, I told the kid I would be in. Now here's when I was driving in, I asked myself, I know this guy's angry, and I know he's going to insult me. What can I control? And I said to myself, what is my goal here? My goal was, I don't want him to be able to touch my inner peace, because as soon as I surrender that, we're going down a bad road. Because I'm going to come back at him and everything. I said, in order to be a professional, I need to be able to maintain my inner peace. So what can I control? I can't control him. I can't control what he's going to say. I can't control how he receives what I'm going to say. What I can control is the energy that's coming off of me. So I'm going to pay attention to how I'm feeling. That's it. I'm going to let him talk and completely ignore that energy that's coming off of him, because I already know he's angry. And when I got onto the stage, here I sat at the piano and I started stripping it out to tune it, and here he comes. And he's angry, as I would expect, and the first thing I did was apologize to him. I wanted to strike the first blow. So I said, I'm really sorry. I said, someone of your caliber has to tolerate this. I said, let me explain what the situation is. And I told him. And I said, look, I understand. Tonight you're going to go out and you're going to have to sit in front of those people. And if this piano doesn't get out of your way and allow you to interpret the piece the way that you have earned the right to do, they're not going to know it's the piano's fault. They're just going to think you stink. And I said, and you're going to be reading bad reviews tomorrow and all this sort of stuff. I said, and you're out there by yourself. Well, as I was saying this to this guy, you could see the body language changing, the anger dropping, his energy changing. And he, from this, this beet red face and all this tension in him, he softened and softened. And then he said, what did you say your name was? And I told him my name was Tom. He goes, nobody's ever talked to me like this. He said, I'm really comfortable with you because you understand, what I'm upset about and what I'm afraid of.
Yes.
So he said, I'm going to go down to the room. You tell me when it's done. I went down to the room after I finished it, and I said, why don't you come up and play? And he goes, I don't need to. He said, I don't need to because of what you said. I know you're on my team.
Yes.
Now, it wasn't over then because he did a brilliant concert. But 2 years later, he came back in town at another venue. And when I walked into the theater, he was up on stage playing the piano, and he looked out as I came down the aisles, and he said, oh, I am so relieved it's you. He said, and I said, well, how's the piano? And he goes, it's got a few things. He said, you'll figure it out. He said, are you coming to the show? I said, I'd love to, but I don't have a ticket. He said, I'll get you a ticket. So there was a situation where everything, he put on an amazing show. He felt appreciated. We almost became friends, and this is a world-renowned, concert pianist. And it all came from me being aware of what was going on in my head, what my thoughts were, being outside of the whole thought process and not getting pulled into that, because I knew other technicians that would just get right in their face.
I mean, I feel like if this doesn't translate to the restaurant industry, if you
Right.
don't see the connection as a restaurant owner or operator, like how often do we run into guests who are just irate, and like it all starts with going into your mind and not letting that energy control your energy. And then the second thing that you did, which I believe is just beautiful, is you empathized. You got into their perspective. You before they had to share their perspective, you said, I feel what you're feeling. And all this is so powerful. And I have a feeling that as we start to like march forward into the conversation and we cover your 3 books, I really want to get like the evolution of your practice on the practicing mind, right? So before we take our first break to thank our sponsors, like I'm assuming it makes sense to go into these books in chronological order, but I know that you also wrote them that they could be picked up at any point and you could read a chapter and get something from it. But what is and maybe in like less than 3 minutes, just give us like the 30,000 foot like arc of like the process of the practicing mind, fully engaged, and it's just a thought. How do these all like tie into each other? Then we'll get in and we'll really like dissect.
The practicing mind was me understanding where lack of discipline comes from, because without discipline you have nothing.
Yeah.
If your mind isn't disciplined, it doesn't matter how much you want to do something. That's what I was doing. I had all these goals and everything, and I wasn't realizing them, and I was the one to blame. So that was where that started. I wanted to understand when are you performing at your highest level? Why do I experience impatience? Why do I lack discipline? What are all the elements of that? And what is present moment functioning? What is being process oriented? And so that was the practicing mind, was all the research that I did to write that, and how I got from being way over here and not any of those things to being, I would say mastering them as far as I could see. Because when I started, I was embarrassed at how undisciplined I was, and by the time I was maybe 22, everybody was telling me I was the most disciplined person they knew, which I thought was funny because I didn't see the connection. Life just got so much easier for me. That's all I saw, and I was achieving all this stuff, but it never occurred to me that, I really have changed a lot. Fully engaged I almost felt like it was, there's a lot of stories in there that are, it's almost like 7 more chapters to the practicing mind. It's like applications, of things. And we can talk about some of those stories because I'm sure they'll come up on their own. But one I'll just say is, before you go anywhere, and I'd learned this, is you have to have thought awareness. Without thought awareness, you're nowhere and you're not going to get anywhere. And in the Fully Engaged, I talked, the very first chapter is, let's talk about how you learn to be aware of your thoughts. Well, it's a skill. And how do you do that?
So I know, because I read Practicing Mind, I know you do talk about thought awareness, but it sounds like you kind of pull back the layers on that in Fully Engaged.
Well, I talk in Fully Engaged, I talk about, this is the practice. This is the practice you do every day for 10 minutes. This is what will give you an anchor in the observer. It'll make you objective to what's going on in everything in your life, not just in the practice of building this thought awareness, but in everything that happens to you during the day. Instead of the stuff happening to you, you'll notice what's going on, and then you'll make a decision. And then It's Just a Thought was several years of research into what have we learned about quantum physics, how that relates to our thinking, the field, the energy that comes out of us. And the reason that this is important is because we are in a system where what we think is impacting what happens to us. Our thoughts are not as private as we used to think. Our thoughts are electromagnetic energy, and they move outside of it. It's us, and they move into a field, and through things like HeartMath, other people's neurosystems are receiving this information from us, and that's very applicable to what we were just talking about. Like, you got a customer who's really upset. Well, they're going to feel your energy. Like when you go over there, your energy is going to be going into their neurosystem. And if your energy is very calming, it can overcome their annoyance.
Yeah.
So that's but it's just a thought. Is the mind and the subconscious and how they communicate and what the language is of them. And how do you become aware of that so you become in control of it?
Yeah, and it's crazy because this sounds a lot of, especially the conversations around It's Just a Thought. It sounds really like woo-woo bullshit, right? But the more we get into the science, the more our science evolves, and we can get into what's actually happening internally, hooking the mind up to sensors. We can see that there's stuff going on that, like you point out, that things that the Eastern cultures have been saying for so long, through just being aware and paying attention to the data and the emotions and listening to that. And then Western culture where it's so science based and unless you can recreate it in an experiment and there's data, it's not real. Right. But now we're starting to realize that the Western side is starting to catch up to the Eastern side of things. Right.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I think that I think where the misnomer, the misconception comes in is that in the East, they were scientists that used what they had. They explored internally. Everything they did was internal. And they really weren't concerned about sharing it with everybody else. It was for themselves. What happens if I sit in a room for 8 hours and I sit there and meditate? What happens? What do I have access to? And everything all the knowledge that they gained, because it wasn't empirical, it wasn't outside, that was through conscious experience. So there's a thing in the introduction, and It's Just a Thought, where it talks about gamma brain waves. And in the East, they were experiencing gamma brain waves for centuries. They didn't know they were called that because we named them.
Yeah.
And they didn't call themselves mystics. We called them that. To them, they were just scientists.
They just were.
Yeah, it was just they were doing what they could do to figure out how the universe worked.
Yeah.
And as you said, empirical science, the problem with it is it always lags behind because it has to be able to produce empirical data. And then that means it has to have technology.
It's not real until you can prove it's
right.
real.
It's not real until you can prove it's real. So now and there was an experiment that was done where they brought in these, quote, Olympic meditators, and now we have the technology to see what their brain's doing, when they're meditating, and they wanted to see, well, where does their brain go? These people that are these monks from Tibet, and also just ordinary people that are really what these Olympic meditators. They meditate a lot, have meditated for years. Well, what they found was that they could get into a gamma wave state very quickly and stay there as long as they wanted, where the average person experienced that wavelength for a second and a half.
What is gamma wavelength? What is that?
I don't know. Because my point is that it is when your brain, there's beta, theta. There are different things. Like when you're in sleep, you're in a certain wave state. Like when you're awake and you're very active, your brain is in a certain wave state. Gamma is way above that, and so when the brain gets in that state, it's a very deep state of meditation. What they're saying is that your cognitive abilities, your consciousness has access to information outside of the brain. And so it's beyond linguistics. That's the reason why I say I don't know. I can't say it. But that's what. But my point is really that now we know what they were experiencing. 'Cause, they're seeing it on the screen. And so now it's real.
Yeah.
But it was real to them or hundreds of years ago.
So I want to take a break to thank our sponsors, but when we come back, what I want to do is dive deeper into the practicing mind and fully engage. And I know you don't want to give the book away in today's episode, but kind of talk to our listeners about how you become, what's the process of becoming more disciplined to look like, and how do you become more thought aware. And I want to get into that, and then I'd love to wrap up today's conversation talking about your last book, It's Just a Thought, and where we're heading with this, because I think that's really cool too. But we'll be right back.
We have to interrupt today's video to let you know that right now Restaurant Systems Pro is offering a no strings attached 60-day trial that will help you improve your systems, increase your profit, and find better work-life balance. All you have to do is click the link below.
We are back, and now I really just want to drill down and leave the listeners with something to take away, as far as we understand that the practicing mind is important, repetition, we got into the why, but let's get into the how. So where does it make sense to start? Pick it back up.
I think the first thing where I start with all clients is you have got to have you call it meditation. I call it thought awareness training, because we're not looking for a transformational experience here in terms of a religious experience. What we're looking for is to develop the skill of and that's all it is a skill of being aware of what our mind is doing without our permission.
Yeah. And for you, what triggered all this was discipline. You wanted more discipline.
I wanted more discipline. And so I thought, I have to get more of a handle on where my thoughts are coming from. And when I have a thought, why does it have so much impact? Because I didn't know at the time, but my lack of discipline was habitual at that point. Like I'd say, I got to practice the piano. And as soon as I would say that, my subcobconscious goes,
this is going to suck.
Yeah, and it would just say, well, you don't like doing this. And it would give me that feeling, so I hadn't reprogrammed. But you can't get into any of that. The key to the prison door is becoming the observer. There's two perspectives. One is being in your thoughts, and the other is noticing your thoughts. And they're very different perspectives, and when you experience it, you've experienced it. But you can't have that experience without what I'm calling a very simple meditation practice. And I call it thought awareness training because I feel like meditation has too many connotations to different people. So what we're really looking for is to get the person to a point where they start to notice, like these kids, that I spoke about earlier, they're telling their mind to stop, and their mind it's a problem-solving machine. If you don't give it a problem, it's going to go looking for one. And in order for you to be able to control that or change it, you have to notice what it's doing. And when you're noticing what it's doing, you're not in the thought. Most, as we said earlier, 95% of the day, you're in your thoughts. That's what science is telling us. You're only out of it 5% of the day. So let's bump that number up. And how do we do that? Well, we got to notice when we're in the thought. Otherwise, for the most part, we don't know when we're in the thought. We're just in the thought, and it feels normal because that's how we've lived our life.
Yeah. I think a good analogy for the listeners too. We're always, as restaurateurs, thinking about like shaving points off for profit, right? Like if you're doing 10% profit, like how do I get to 25% profit, right? Or 5% profit, which I'm sure a lot of my listeners at one point might have been at 5% profit until they started to dial things in. So it's the same, it's the same idea. Like how do you start shaving, intentionality into your business to be more profitable? And you get to that point where, maybe it's a good correlation or not, I don't know. But how do we start getting more mindful? Like what's the first step? Like
the first step is a simple process of you sit in a chair. I want your feet flat on the floor. I'd like a chair that has back support, not something where you're going to hunch over. And I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to follow your breath. Just watch your body breathe. Now, the mechanics sound ridiculously simple. How can this have any power? But what will happen is your mind will get bored very quickly, and maybe 15 seconds if you're lucky. And then it basically says, I need a problem. I'm going to go think about something I shouldn't have said yesterday. I don't know what the repercussions are going to be about that, or I've got this meeting coming up, or I'm a little uncomfortable about that. Whatever it is, it's going to take off. And you're going to go with it. And you're not even going to notice that you went with it because that's the way you've lived your life. That's the 95% of your day. And then what will happen is because you have set an intention and you've told your mind, I want you to just notice my breath, watch my body breathe. You will wake up, you'll wake up. And you'll notice that you're not watching your body breathe, you're thinking about this meeting. And that's where this incredible power comes from, because it's in that blink of an eye that you re-anchor to the observer. You're no longer in the thinking. You're watching the thinking, because you have to be noticing the thinking in order to notice that your mind isn't doing what you're asking it to.
Yeah, you need something to do to notice that you're not doing it.
Right. And that's the reason why you give yourself something simple like breathing, because you need a point of relativity.
Yeah.
If I said, well, read this book, that's just too much.
Yeah.
You need one singular, simple task and that you're giving your mind that you can say, this is all I want you to do. All I want you to do is watch my body breathe. And when the brain gets bored and it goes off and you go with it, then, like I said, you wake up, and two things happen when you wake up. One is you anchor in the observer, which is now you've left the thinking, and you're outside of the thinking, and then you pull your mind back. You discipline, that's the discipline. You pull your mind back onto the task of watching your body breathe. And that is a rep. And where people fall down with this is I hear it all the time. I was trying to meditate and I'm terrible at it. Well, you can't be terrible. There is no such thing as terrible. So why are you saying that? Like, well, because I'm always chasing my mind. Well, you can't chase your mind if you're not noticing what your mind is doing. So that's good. And what you have to understand is there's no such thing as a bad meditation session. Some meditation sessions, your mind is agitated and you feel under stress, and so it's going to be running all over the place.
Yeah.
And other times it's going to be placid.
Well, the cool thing about breathing too is that it's something that is both conscious and subconscious. Like, it's one of the habits that you create because like it's a repetition. Like, your body does it without you having to think about it, right? Just like being conscious in your subconscious and your conscious mind. Like, your subconscious mind is there, like your breathing's there, happening in the background, but you can also use your prefrontal cortex to override that and say, no, I'm actually going to control my breathing. Like you control your thoughts. Is there a correlation there?
Well, you bring up an interesting point. There was when they were mapping the brain, the different areas of the brain and what they did, and this is going way back. Dr. Wilder Penfield, I think, was the guy, and he was one of the people that worked on it. They were stimulating the brain because you can do that because the brain doesn't have the pain receptors. So he said to this one guy where they were sticking probes in and seeing what part of the brain did different things. So, but the person was completely awake. So he puts his probe and he said, I'm going to make you lift your left arm. So he pushes the probe in, the guy's left arm goes up. And he says to the guy, are you lifting your arm? And which is interesting, are you lifting your arm? And the guy says, no, I'm not lifting my arm. You're sticking something in my brain, which is making my arm go up. He goes, okay, can you do something else with your arm? You like wave it back and forth. And he goes, oh, okay. And he waves it back and forth. Now he's not telling him to do that with the probe. And then he pulls the probe and goes, all right, I'm going to make your right arm go up. Can you not allow it to go up? And the guy said, yeah. He pushes the probe in, arm doesn't go up. So the quandary there was, where's the commander? It's not in the brain. You do not exist in the brain. That isn't where you live. So you, the observer, is outside of the thinking of the brain.
So is the observer, correct me if I'm wrong, in my understanding, the observer is the prefrontal cortex.
No.
No?
No.
Or
The
the
observer
frontal-
doesn't live in the brain at all. It's not. The prefrontal cortex has.
This is why I'm here to learn more. So like I was under your awareness, your self-awareness, emotional intelligence, the peak of emotional intelligence happens in that part in the front of your brain, like right there.
Well, there's where you get into decision making and all that. But if you look at heart math, which we were going to talk about, the consciousness is really in the heart. It isn't in the brain. The brain is basically waiting for the information.
And this is new science that's coming out, right?
That's 3.5 decades.
Okay.
I wouldn't call it brand new. They're pretty far into it. They have an awful lot of documented things.
Because I've heard that there's like the nerves in your heart, and when you have when your heart's talking to you and you have these feelings, it's there's something going on there. But not to get too off track. So what you're saying is that your awareness is actually outside of your body.
It's outside of your brain.
Okay.
Because we are. You're getting into quantum physics here. This is like where people can say, well, this sounds a little foo-foo. Well, that's only because you don't know all the technology. This is what has been going on. All the new sciences are saying that we exist in a field of consciousness. Like the space between you and me is not empty space. It's energy and information. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. And that's how we're all connected. Now, the way that I look at this for myself is I think of the oceans of the world. We name the oceans, but they don't know they have names. They're just one big body of water. So if you think of inside of the ocean, all the way down to the depths of it, there are hundreds of trillions of droplets of water, and each one of those is an individual. So the individual is a droplet of water, but they're made out of the water that they're in. So that ocean of energy with all these droplets in it is conscious. This is what they're telling me. So it's conscious. So if you're off the coast of Africa and you're a droplet of water and you have a thought, that thought goes into the ocean and it's everywhere. And it's in the Mediterranean. It's off Atlantic City. It's everywhere. The information is there. So my point is that the brain to me is like your laptop. You are not your laptop. You use the
brain's
laptop.
the hardware.
Yeah, the brain. You use your brain for calculations and computations and everything. In certain areas of the brain, what heart math is saying is that the heart has it's more than a nervous system. The neurocardiologists found in the early 90s, I know the date now, or the time frame now, I didn't used to, but in the early 90s, they realized that the heart has the equivalent of a brain. It has its own nervous system, it has its own memory, and when they started tracking the communication between the heart and the brain, they found that the heart is actually talking about 75 to 80% of the time. The brain, very little. And what the brain does is it regulates things like breath and blood pressure and all that, but it depends on the heart to tell it what it's supposed to do, what hormones to release, and so the thinking, the real consciousness, is really coming from the heart. It's not in the brain. So
when you're to come back to what we were talking about with the process of getting into meditation and what this looks like, you focus on the breathing, that awareness, that place of, the observer is coming from, we don't know exactly, but possibly your heart.
Yeah,
Okay.
And your heart is. The consciousness that's there is part of the whole consciousness. So again, it's like the consciousness is, like I said, the droplet of the ocean. You are an individualized piece of the consciousness, but your consciousness is tied to everything else. So going back to so how do we develop this practicing mind thing? Well, the very first step is to get anchored in the I am not my thoughts. I have the thoughts. I experience thoughts. Some thoughts I create when I need to solve a problem, or I decide where I'm going for dinner, or whatever. That's when you are thinking. But most of the time what is happening is that stimulus are happening, and the subconscious has a response that you have installed and practiced thousands of times, and that's why you get into it so easily, because you've mastered. It's like playing a C scale on the piano. 100 times, you get good at it, and so that response, you've mastered it. So it just flows like that, and it's just effortless.
Yeah.
And so you experience it.
I'm curious. So I try to meditate. I go through periods where I'm really good at it, where I'll go like 2 or 3 months where every morning I do it and it's great. Then I'll be bad and I'll do it like once a week or something like that. But it's still way better than I was doing 10 years ago. And that's what I try to remind myself. Like where I am right now is exactly where I'm supposed to be, which is one of the lessons from your book. It's a really great analogy using a seed in a plant, but I don't want to get off that. One thing I do to help get into that place of meditation is I focus on the breathing, but I also focus on a number. I visualize a number. So I count to 10, but I try to see the number 1. I try to see the number 2. I try to see the number 3. And I found that not just focusing on the breath, but focusing on which breath I'm on helps. Is that good or bad practice?
Well, there's all kinds of meditation. There's nothing wrong with that. There's guided meditations, but the reason why I don't use that for this is because you're thinking. I don't want you to be thinking. I want you to be watching the thinking your mind is doing. You're not doing it. Your mind is thinking.
Yeah.
And because I want you to notice. I want you to get to a place where, when somebody says, my meal is cold. There's going to be a response to that, and I want you outside of the response. And I want you to be the observer, noticing. Hey, like what I tell people is, when you get upset or angry, what you should be saying is, isn't that interesting? I told myself that's how I should react to this, because that's what has happened. And ask yourself, if I could act any way I wanted in this moment with this difficult customer who's complaining and making a scene in the restaurant, if I could react any way I want to this person, what does that look like? Do I even know? I ask that to people all the time when they have a situation that really upsets them. I said, well, okay, I'm going to touch you on the head with a magic wand, and you're going to become whoever you want to be in that moment. Who is that person? They never have an answer.
Yeah.
Because all they do is they're just in this loop. And I say, well, if you don't know who you want to be, you don't even have a target.
Yeah.
So let's start there.
This ties into a lot of business practicing, visioning, the power of visioning, of having a vision and having like a mission, right? And existing for something, a goal, an objective. But so back to this practice. So once you get good at snapping out of your thoughts controlling you to now you controlling your thoughts, you becoming the observer, what's next?
Well, the next thing to do is, you handle it in a methodical way. So I usually have people, when we start coaching, I want you to bring me one circumstance that you're not good at. you're not good at handling it. It upsets you.
Can we do this with me? Can you use me as an example?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I've always identified as somebody who's really big picture. I'm a dreamer. I'm a deep thinker. I'm not a fast thinker. Like, for example, like working in a restaurant, you give me 5 things to remember, I'm done for. You know, like if I'm on the line and you shout out like 5 orders, forget it. You know, like my short-term memory is horrible, and I would say that I'm not a technician. I'm not good with attention to detail. So if this is my challenge, what like use me as an example.
Well,
Or is this a bad example?
Well, it's not that it's a bad example. I would want a more definite thing. Like, okay, so somebody said, like you said, somebody shouted out an order to you.
Yeah.
Like, and so the first thing you'd have to do there is you would have to notice that you have told yourself you're not good at this.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first thing. So you're not good at it. Like, in
Yeah.
other words, if you tell yourself you're not good at it, you won't be good at it. You know, like it's just the subconscious that's
Yeah.
going to fulfill that. Like, but you know, it's like I had a kid, college golfer, say, you know, hey, I'm winning a tournament. I'm on the 18th hole and I got 1 stroke lead, and I can take a risk and shoot and hit the ball over the water. You know, but if it goes in the water, I probably will lose the lead and I may lose the tournament. Like, so what should I do? You know, and I said, well, the problem is the way that you have analyzed that is you've asked yourself, should I take the risk? I said, no, here's how your subconscious hears that. Your subconscious hears, if you decide to take the risk, then the subconscious says, go get the mechanics and the mindset he expresses when he feels like he's taking a risk. I said, your takeaway, or the way that you had voiced that was, this is a no-brainer shot. Go get, because now you're telling your subconscious to go get you the mechanics you feel like when you're 150 yards out in the fairway and there's nothing between you and the green. It's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
I said that's what you want, and that's what you want to tell the subconscious to go get for you. But what you've told it is basically I'm not good at this.
Yeah, let me give you a better, more specific example. So recently, Sam's here, right? Sam has been great. My goal a year and a half ago was to include video. I had already been traveling on site. I'm like, I'm missing a huge opportunity here. I'm in person with these people. We have the audio, that's great. The quality's better being in person, but I feel like there's an opportunity being missed because I'm already going there. There's content that's on the table that I'm not getting because I don't know how to use a camera. I don't have the patience, the attention to detail to take that file and to upload it to social media, to upload it to YouTube, or even just to know how to make it look good with the editing and the After Effects and all this stuff. And like that mountain of all the shit I have to learn how to do to be good, to get to that next level, to me was overwhelming. So I said, well, I'm going to outsource. I'm going to find somebody like Sam who's good at this and create an opportunity for somebody else and create a win-win situation, right? So now I'm at this point, the evolution. I'm comfortable talking about this with Sam in the room because we've talked. We're very candid with each other. The goal for me is to be able to do this either on my own, so I can take some of the budget I have for Sam to cover Sam's liabilities and all that stuff, to put that into being able to be on the road longer and to be able to slow down and to be more present and to follow up on the leads and be more journalistic. So as I'm saying this, the issue of having to do this on my own is coming back up again, or at least finding some better way just to capture. So this is the narrative I'm telling myself. I'm not good at this stuff. Like, I'm not good at the attention to detail. I'm dyslexic. I'm colorblind. Like, I'm gonna screw things up. It's gonna make the brand look bad. So you can see the anxiety coming up now, the narrative, the thoughts. So as I'm saying this, what's going through your mind?
Well, one thing is that you're looking at the whole picture, which is always the first mistake. In other words, if in the Practicing Mind, you'll remember there's a chapter called the 4 S words. I mean, the very first thing you need to do is to break that down. Like, because you can,
right? Is it the first one?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm getting ahead of you.
Yeah. So you want to simplify it.
Yeah.
Simplify the process.
Simple. That's what it is.
So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to break it down into small sections. Like, because it's much easier to focus on. Well, look, let's just focus on one part of that project.
Yeah.
And what you're experiencing, Eric, is the whole thing. You're experiencing all that has to happen for you to accomplish this.
Yeah.
And you're not going to accomplish it all at once. You're accomplishing it by a series of things that are strung together. So you have to live in that instead of, you have to live in the process of putting this together. So what is your, what do I have to do between 8 o'clock in the morning and noon today? That's part of this. You start to become organized, but you have to learn what the thought awareness does is you notice that's a thought. when you go, I'm feeling like that, that's a thought. That's what you're experiencing. You're experiencing a feeling, which is an emotion, and that emotion has nothing to do with you accomplishing this. All it's doing is eroding your performance. So your interpretation, I have a thing, interpretation creates your experience. And so your interpretation is, I'm not good at this. I'm going to mess this up. So your experience of that is going to be this feeling of being overwhelmed, and so your performance is just going to plummet.
Yeah.
And now you can't fix that if you're in it. You can't fix it unless you notice.
If the thoughts are controlling
you're being controlled by your
all you
thought.
hear is a narrative, and then it takes over.
And then you realize, look, I am not these thoughts. These thoughts are just happening, and I've installed this reaction, even though I didn't mean to.
Yeah.
It's always recording. You didn't mean to install that, but you did. And so now, and because, when it first starts, you might have a project that it's too new and you have too big of a piece and you're just not performing at the level. Like I said, goals with accurate data. You have set a goal that has way too big of a short time span and too big of what you have to accomplish. And so because of that, you have gotten yourself, you start this thing of, well, that didn't go well. And so now moving forward, you're thinking like, I'm not good at this. Yeah. And then that just keeps getting hammered in and hammered in and hammered in. And the pushback when you try to change that is it's strong. And the reason is because the subconscious is going, what are you doing to me, man? You told me this is what you want. You told me this is what you want to feel whenever you start a project like this. And now you're telling me you don't like it? So that's really what's going on there. So you have to expect that.
Is subconscious different than ego?
Well, yes, I would say so. I think the ego, being in the ego is, and I don't know how you define the ego. Like it's
the truth you believe about yourself. I guess.
Your concept of yourself.
Yeah.
For one. But I think that what people have to realize is that the observer is not in the ego. You're either in the ego or you're in the observer. The problem with the ego is it's an extremely weak place to be, because the ego is so easily manipulated. When you're in the ego, if somebody says...
Stroke someone's ego if you want them to get them to do something.
Well, and for yourself,
Yeah.
It's a very weak place, because if somebody says something nice to you, you feel good. If they say something nasty, you feel bad. You're not in control of any of it. They're in control of it. You've surrendered all your control. When you're in the ego, you don't have control. The environment has control.
Got it.
When you're when you're coming from the observer, you're impervious to what is going on. It's like if you look at Captain Sully landing, on the Hudson. The only thing I can think of that could have been worse is it could have been at night, But other than that, he's got full tanks. He's low, altitude-wise. He's got 200 people on board, and he's lost both engines.
Maybe in icing conditions.
Yeah, So you look at that
Yeah.
and you think like, okay, what did he do in that situation? If you ever listen to the transcript, he's got like A, B, C, and D. Can't do that. This might work, but I don't want to do it. It's too risky. He's just going through there. He is not being run by the situation. He is like in the observer, and he's just thinking so clearly. He could have been going, I can't believe all the years I've been flying, and this had to happen to me.
Yeah.
It has never happened to anybody. Like this really stinks.
I'm gonna die.
Yeah, and all these people are dependent on me. I don't need this. He didn't do that because he was completely observer oriented, and that's who I want to be. I want to feel free. When I say free, if you're not in control of your mind, you're not in control of anything.
Yeah. So going back to this idea of fully engaged and going through the process, and you kind of were coaching us through the way it starts with breathing. It becomes becoming aware of, the outside, becoming aware of self. Like what's the term you like to use once you get to that point where you recognize that you're
self-aware. Your true self. You become aware of when you are in your thoughts and when you're outside of when you're watching your thoughts.
So you achieve that, and with practice, you can find yourself going from daydreaming or drifting to back to being centered again. We're using different words.
It's a skill.
Yeah. That was the next thing. And then we started talking about just intention and like, where do you want to be? Like, what's the goal? What's the objective? And having vision and having a strategy or whatever word you might use. I think that's where we left off as far as the how-to. Do you want to pick up that train of thought?
I think that, I look at that, thought awareness is the key to the prison door. Because once you have that, it's a skill that you can aim at anything. You'll find what'll happen is it doesn't take that long. I don't know, like 10 days or so of this, meditating like this.
It's easier than it sounds. Like I found myself when you're describing it, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Right. So
I was able to get there.
Right, and there is no. I think you have to realize there is no bad session. Sessions, I've been meditating. I've studied all different kinds of meditation, and I've been doing it for 4.5 decades. And I still have sessions where my mind is just all over the place and I'm chasing it all the time. The difference is that I don't judge it. To me, it doesn't mean I'm not good at this. And I think it's really important to be aware of that. Don't quit the practice because you're assuming that because your mind is racing all the time that you're bad at it. What's really happening is your mind's always been doing that. You just didn't notice it.
How do you know you're getting better at it?
Well, what will happen is during the day, things will happen and you won't be pulled into them. You will notice that I'm having this thought. Once, well, here's an example. When I was coming here this morning, we were talking before the recording, and I got into my truck and the brakes were failing in it. Now this is like 7 o'clock this morning, so my knee-jerk reaction was, "Oh, well, this is a great day for this to happen. I got to go into, I got to make Eric into the," and I noticed immediately, I'm not that thought. This is a reaction that I don't need. Like I need to get in there. It's a simple Uber. I can stop this thought because I'm the gatekeeper of my thoughts. I stopped. I said, "You're not happening." It's just a simple thing.
Yeah.
I get an Uber. I come in. And it was. I came in, I got a cup of coffee, and I sat here and waited for you. Now, I could have just gone, my hair's on fire, but I didn't do that. And how did that happen? It happened because I recognized I was having a thought.
You noticed the emotions.
Yeah, I noticed the thought, and that thought was not going to control me. And because of the discipline that has come from, this simple process of 10 minutes a day, I was able to, just like, when your mind takes off in the meditation and you pull it back, well, that's what happened there. My mind took off, and I just said, no, you're not happening. And I pulled it back to where I wanted.
Have you ever fallen asleep during meditation?
Yeah.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because it happened to me twice once.
Yeah, I don't see it as a bad thing. I think that.
But it was also really after I woke up, it was probably 5 or 10 minutes, and you feel so you slept for hours. It's weird. I don't know.
Well, yeah, that's because you have gotten into such a state of relaxation, But I would say this is one of the reasons why you want to sit with your feet flat on the floor and your back erect, and you should choose a time during the day. People go, well, what's the best time? Well, the best time is the time that you can do it regularly. If you get up in the morning and you say, I'll figure out some time during the day, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
You need to say, in the morning before I take my shower, I'm going to do my 10 minutes.
After my jog, before my shower.
Right, or whatever it is. You need to do that so that you're consistent with it. And by the way, if you do that, what will happen is your body and your mind will get used to that. And so when you sit down, it's expecting that. It's sort of just you get hungry at 5 o'clock in the afternoon or whatever. Your body will be like, it's time to meditate.
Yeah.
And that will flow better.
Now, I want to talk about some of the things you talk about in the It's Just a Thought, your most recent. But before we move on to some of the newer age, the quantum physics type stuff, the heart math and all that sort of thing, anything we haven't talked about up to this point that we need to talk about to round off the conversation as far as
I think the one story that I would say is very important is understanding the process of transforming yourself. Meaning you're this way and you have an idea of who you want to be at the end, and you have to go through, it's a process. And I think about one of the big golfers who won recently, and he ended up having to make this last putt or he would have lost the tournament. And they were asking him, what were you thinking? He said, you have to figure out what the process is for you to get where you want to go, and then you have to fall in love with it. And he goes, and then when you get to the place, like he said, I had to make that last putt, which is, I don't know, it was 6 feet. It was a knee knocker. He said, I always say, interpretation creates your experience, which will then impact your performance. He said, when I was standing over the ball, he said, I was thinking to myself, this is where I want to be. Everybody else was thinking he must be stressed out like crazy. He goes, yeah, I want it. I want that stress. He said, because I want to beat it. I want to know that it doesn't matter what you throw at me, I'm going to beat it. And I can't beat that if I'm in that situation. So there was a story I told, fully engaged with a girl, a young woman who was a golfer, and she was very, very good. And she had broken all these state records, and she was better than most. They played co-ed golf, at that level, and she had this one tournament that she wanted to play in, and it was a qualifier. So if she did well, she would have the opportunity to play in a professional tournament as an amateur, and so that was why she hired me to work with her. And she said, I have this bad habit. She goes, when I'm performing well and everything is going well, get out of my way. She said, but if the wheels start to come off, there doesn't seem to be anything I can do.
Yeah.
She said, I just implode.
Yeah.
And so I said, so she said, and I've got this tournament. It's a year away, and I want to win in the top 3. And so I worked with her, and for the year, and then it was very unique. They allowed the kids to have a caddy, which they didn't usually do. So she asked me to caddy for her. And when I pulled up to the course, the morning of the tournament, it was a one-day tournament, I saw her swinging, and I could see she was so attached to winning this that she had basically surrendered all of her athleticism. She was trying to steer the ball. She didn't want to hit it, make a mistake and everything, instead of just relaxing. And she had the athleticism. She proved it all, all season long. So I thought, do I say something? No, I don't want her to start overthinking. And this just could be nerves, so I'm just going to let her go off the first tee, and let's just see if she self-corrects. Well, she didn't. And she just kept getting worse. And I thought, well, should I intervene? And no, I shouldn't intervene, because the whole reason she hired me was so she could figure out how to correct this. So I'm carrying for her, and she's all over the place. And so by like the 5th or 6th hole, she's just shot herself completely out of the tournament. Forget about winning. She's like a joke at this point, and getting more and more frustrated. So we're walking down the fairway, and I said, why did you ask me to work with you? And she said, I asked you to work with me because of this. She was annoyed. She goes, of this.
You're not doing your
right.
job.
She said, I wanted to be able to overcome this. Yeah. And I said, so how do you do that? And she said, I don't have the faintest idea, Tom. I've tried everything I know. I said, well, you haven't tried everything you know because you haven't fixed it. I said, you're missing my question. I said, my question is, how do you fix playing like this? I said, you have to be playing like this. You have to be in the situation that you want to overcome in order to be able to execute whatever skill that you've worked on to overcome it. I said, so...
Say that one more time.
You have to be, in order to... when you're trying to overcome a situation, you have to be in the situation in order to overcome it. In other words, if you want to play good in the rain, it's got to be raining. Yeah. You can't go outside on a sunny day. Yeah. You have to be... I said, you wanted to figure out how to turn your game around when you just totally stunk.
So in this scenario, the situation that she's in is losing her shit, and
right.
So she is in the perfect situation because it's happening.
Right.
So take it from there.
Well, and so I said, you need to interpret this situation differently. I said, first of all, forget about the tournament and winning this tournament. It's a one-day tournament. It's not going to determine whether you become a professional golfer. It's not going to determine, I think she was a junior in high school. I said, it's not going to determine whether you get a golf scholarship. It's not going to determine anything except it's presenting you with the opportunity to play around and figure out how to turn your game around.
Yeah.
Like, that's what it's presenting you with. And this is what you have been waiting for. You've been waiting for the opportunity to execute. I said, so stop being so attached to winning the tournament, because that's out of the question. You're not going to win. So it's to throw that out. I said, and just change your interpretation to, this is what I've been waiting for,
Yeah.
and go for there. Well, it took her like a hole and a half. And her swing mechanics were back, and she was striping it. And when we were going down the 18th fairway, she was skipping. And, she told me, she said, Tom, I would give back every trophy I have won this year and every record I've broken for the way I feel right now. Because she said, I didn't think this was possible for me to be playing so poorly and for me to intentionally turn it around. I said, well, that's the value of what you learned today.
So in that moment, her stress, her anger for not playing the way that she wants to is compounding to the point where she was not going to win that game, that match or whatever. And then you remind her that this is where you wanted to be, is in this moment where you can choose to go in the other direction. And she became self-aware of the emotions in that moment. And I'm assuming what happened, if she's practicing correctly, she silenced that and just let her body do the work.
Well,
Trust
she
herself.
let go. Attachment is very bad. Attachment to the goal is bad, because attachment to the goal puts you at war with the process of achieving it. because you've told yourself, I can't be happy. Like for her, I can't be happy unless I win this tournament. So that's where her mindset was. It wasn't on one stroke at a time. It wasn't being she wasn't in the present moment anymore. She was living in the it's like, the archers, there's that story where, in the 70s in the Olympics, the American archer coach was frustrated because the Americans were so focused on getting bullseyes instead of the process of drawing the bow, which is what the Asians were. So, when I used to shoot target archery, and you get 3 shots. So, the American archers, the only reason they drew the bow at that time was to let the arrow go and see if they got the prize. And so if the arrow was wide left or something, now they're mad. They're mad because they didn't get it. Now they're down to just 2 arrows, whereas the Asian archers were almost ambivalent to the target. They were focused on drawing the bow and releasing the arrow perfectly, and the bullseye just got in the way.
Yeah.
And so, so it was. It's a completely different concept and perspective of how to approach it, but it's process, not product. So, you're not attached to the goal. You have to know where the target is. If you don't have a goal, then you're just pulling drawing the bow and letting the arrow.
And
fly.
this was a big aha. What you just said to me was a big aha for me while reading the book. It's the process, not the target, or the goal. And I think that this is something that I get caught up in, and I'm thinking about where I want to be and what I want it to look like and how far away that is. But when you don't focus on that, when you focus on, they use the analogy of how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, right? Over time, but know that but just don't focus on where you want to end up. Focus on where you are right now and how do I do this one thing better. So if I'm video editing, how do I upload the video to the editing software?
Right.
How do I trim down each segment of that, all the different files? How do I do transitions? How do I export just that? Okay, cool, nailed it, mastered this. How do I put audio over this? How do I add After Effects? And don't think about that you have to do that eventually. Just focus on the part that you're focusing on
Right
right
in
now.
front of it. Be where your feet are, as they say.
And then over time, in practice and keep coming back, those things that were a challenge for you the first time, you just know how to do it. And then the next thing, and before you know it, you're doing the thing.
Well, and it's not just that, Eric. It's like when you're only thinking about the thing that's in front of you, you have access to so much more cognitive ability because, to have these conversations and to be in your head and to be thinking, I can't wait till I'm doing this. I can't wait to. Well, that's taking up brain power. That has to something has to be doing all that computation.
And it creates anxiety too.
Absolutely, absolutely, it does. And and the thing is, you're not doing it. My older daughter one time came home, or when she got out of college and she was teaching. She had just started teaching. She was kind of overcompensating. On the weekends, she would do just all this preparatory work for the next week and writing plans and everything. So she called me one Friday afternoon, and she said, I'm going to happy hour with some of the other teachers. And she said, she said, I have to do this planning this weekend. And she started off on this thing. And I said, well, wait a minute. I said, look, you're going to this happy hour. I said, and what you're doing is you're already polluting the happy hour because you're not going to be fully present when you're there. I said, everybody's going to be thinking, you're working on this work that you're not working on, in your head. I said, so let's just solve the problem. I said, how long do you need to do the work? And she said, 4 hours. I said, okay, do you want to do it on Saturday or Sunday? She said, Sunday. And I said, Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon. She said, Sunday afternoon. I said, what, 1 o'clock? And she said, yeah. I said, done. I said, you should not be thinking of that until 1 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. Because if you're in that bar, drinking your pina colada or whatever, and you're thinking about that, you're not doing it. You're just thinking about it. I said, and that thought isn't helping you. It's not finishing the work. It's not doing anything. All it's done is taking your attention away from your friends, which you're supposed to be having fun with.
Right. Yeah. So listening to where we are in this conversation and how this relates back to the restaurant industry, I think most people who open a restaurant have something that they love, whether it's bartending or chef or just service or whatever it is, and they have a vision, this dream of what it's going to be like to open a restaurant, and then they do it, and then they realize, well, this is way more difficult than I thought it was going to be, and then they put energy into doing the research to figure out what they actually have to do to be successful, and that is a big, ugly, hairy, smelly, whatever gross thing you can think of, elephant, right? Because it's so intimidating, all the things you have to do to be good at running and owning a restaurant. Culture, systems, processes, procedures, the product, the legal, HR, and just social media marketing, like all the things you have to do just create this big, nasty, disgusting like goal, right? And it's so overwhelming. It's so intimidating. Anybody would get anxiety about all the things I have to do. But like, just where can I start? What's the most urgent, important thing today? And how
Right.
can I get better every day? And I think this is why I tell my listeners, start where you can. Don't go out and buy the elephant. Buy a mouse. Figure out that mouse, and then get a rat, and then get a cat. And then as you're mastering all these elements, and it's in control, it doesn't happen overnight. But have that vision, have that goal, right? But start someplace that's manageable. What's going through your mind?
Well, I'm thinking that, we're back to, first of all, when you begin to feel the anxiety, you have the awareness that I am not this anxiety. This anxiety is a reaction that I've told myself I should have when I start to think about something like this. And so that's all this mental energy that isn't going into, are you creating the business? No. You're just thinking about everything that is a problem in creating the business. So you have to have control of where you're aiming your mind. Where are you aiming it? Are you aiming it, or is it aiming itself and you're just going along for the ride? Yeah. And I think also that, just to backtrack or to wind back just a little bit, is to look at stuff like you're going to have difficult things. That's normal. It's normal when you start a business. It's normal to have challenging things, because you don't have the experience, So some of the things you don't know how they're going to go. So that's normal. So if you ask yourself, if I could experience this moment any way I want, how would I want that to be? Well, I think you'd want to be calm, you'd want to be direct, you would want to be deliberate in your thinking, so that you're thinking about what you want to think about, and not having the situation run your mind. And so you got to have that starting point, using what you're getting it by what you're talking about, by breaking it down into smaller sections and focusing on that. And you can't do that, Eric, if you just get habitually pulled into the, oh my gosh, there's so much to do.
You also point out, I don't know if it's been echoed enough, that once you get into the practice becomes meditative. In this case, the practice is being a restaurateur is your practice, right? In getting into the details of all the elements of what it takes to be a good restaurateur, like doing that is meditative. Have you gotten into that point?
Yeah, it can. I mean, when you are fully in the present, doing only what you're doing. I mean, all this all the performance research has showed that.
They call this flow, right?
Well, yeah, I guess that's a word that's kicked around for it. Yes, but the bottom line is that you're functioning at your highest level. You're going to accomplish whatever your task is in the least amount of time, with the least amount of effort, and without experiencing a sense of struggle. Isn't that what you want? Like I said, like I find that for most people, they are just run by their habitual thinking, and they're just not aware of it. So that's the reason why the thought awareness training, you have got to do that. Without that, you're not going anywhere. Yeah. You have got to get outside of the whole loop of trigger response, so that the real you can make a decision as to, how do I want to handle this situation? Ask yourself that. How do I want to? Yeah. And just like the pilot does, they don't wait until the engine quits and then pull out the pilot operating handbook and start flipping through it. That's chapter 3, I think it says. They don't do that. They know what they're going to do, before it happens. And I tell people, look, you want a rescue mantra, and what do I mean by that? Like, when when you feel like you're struggling, what is that? The feeling doesn't know it's upsetting you. It's just data. The data is telling you you're up against your threshold. You're not good at this. Yeah. That's all the data is telling you. You're interpreting it as, that has nothing to do with accomplishing and moving through it. Your interpretation is, this is terrible. This is all that has. It's like it has nothing to do. Like if you're a basketball player and you've got 2 foul shots and one of them's got to go through the hoop, or otherwise the team loses. Yeah. And the first one you miss. Now you're at a crossroad. You can say to yourself, like, I'm going to allow what I just saw feedback data to me, and I'm going to take that data and make my next shot go in. Or you could say, I can't believe it. I cannot believe why did I have to be the one in this position? And have this conversation where you're just out of control. Is that going to put the ball through the hoop? No. It's going to make that moment, first of all, it is going to degrade your performance, because when you're having that conversation and you're processing all those emotions, that's cognitive ability for decision making you don't have access to.
Yeah. I've truly loved this conversation. We're not done yet. We're going to take one more quick break to thank our sponsors. We are back, and during the break, I asked Tom, is there anything that hasn't come out that you want to get on the table before I start getting distracted with all these little rabbit holes I want to get into? And your response to that was, what's the message you want to make sure that
the message is, if you have a mantra, it's interpretation creates your experience, which is then going to create your performance in the situation. And I think, in business, all of that, I think one of the most important things is to, when you have a stressful situation, your interpretation should be, it's not a bad thing. Because the reason it feels difficult is because you haven't mastered it. It doesn't mean you can't. Like the golfer, you need to be in the stressful situation in order for you to execute the skill, to move your skill up so that that situation no longer becomes stressful.
Yeah.
In the future when it happens, you're like, oh, this is no big deal. But you can't get to that place unless you go through those things. So I think it's really important to realize that when you have that feeling of, I'm uncomfortable, I'm anxious, I don't like this thing, that's your interpretation of it. But it's actually quite an opportunity, for you. And if you look at it as an opportunity, for me, what I do is, like, in that moment, my rescue mantra is something like game on. This is when the fun starts. You're going down. And I'm talking about the feelings, not the person who's causing the problem. But when those feelings start to feel like they're going to overtake me, I'm like, no, you're not.
Yeah.
This is game on, and I'm going to win this.
And this is what you mean by interpretation, or
right.
Once you interpretate it as an opportunity, you shift.
You will experience it differently, as opposed to you're like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. And the only reason it feels horrible is because you're not good at it.
Yeah.
If you were good at it, you don't think about stuff you're good at because you're good at it.
Danny Meyer talks about writing the end of the story. There's going to be times where the stuff hits the fan, right? It's inevitable in the restaurant industry. Something is going to go wrong, and you can choose to let that be the end of the story, or you can write a new end of the story. And when the stuff hits the fan, that's the trigger, right? You're likely going to have emotions tied to this, bad emotions, like I really screwed up. But that's the opportunity to say, how can I do the unexpected? How can I go above and beyond what other people would do in this situation to write the end of the story, to turn it around? And that's a perfect example of not being like, well, we lost this customer, but how do we win this customer?
Right.
It becomes an opportunity to make a customer for life, because what are you willing to do to show that person how much you care, and how much you want their business, and how truly grateful you are, and to be hospitable, to be warm and overly generous for your
and
actions.
You want to be in control.
Yeah.
When the situation overtakes you with anxiety or anger, you're not in control, because those are emotions that are being put out and you're just experiencing them. But you are not the emotions. You can choose what you're going to experience in there.
Yeah.
And a lot of that comes from your interpretation. If your interpretation is, like the golfer, I live for this. This is what I've been waiting for, because now I get to try this. I'm going to be good at this. If your perspective is from there, then it really does become like a competitive game within yourself.
Yeah.
And like I said, your interpretation will change how you feel in the moment. And that feeling, if you're feeling good about it, if you're feeling like, I want this, I want this situation, then your mind is going to be in a different place, and you're going to have better decision making, and you're going to feel better about the situation when you get through it.
Yeah. So now is where I kind of take the rest of the time, what little time we have left together, to kind of get a little selfish, and because I know you have thoughts and opinions, and I just this is where I want to entertain myself a little bit. So I'm pretty open. Like, I recognize the significance of social media, but I feel like most of my counterparts out there, other people who have podcasts in the business space, the narrative is like always just like, here's the next big thing you can do to make your social media better, or whatever, or encouraging more time spent in devices. And I personally think there's something, I almost feel it's like my moral obligation to tell the other side of that narrative of, there's benefits to like using your devices and being plugged into technology. You can't argue the benefits of AI. You can't argue the benefits of having impressions with social media to get in front of your customers and to do targeted marketing, all this stuff. But the question I want to ask is, at what cost? What are we sacrificing for is a lot of this fear based? All these things we're thinking we have to do to go out there and to be in all these different places digitally, to devote your time to responding to every comment and every bad complaint, and you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it has been engineered to be habitual. It's been engineered.
And that's one thing these companies are really good at. They know human behavior.
Right, absolutely.
And you
They
better
spent
believe they're
millions
manipulating.
of dollars
Yeah,
in
they're
research.
the best at it.
Right, and if you just look around, I remember I used to be a sailboater, and I remember reading. I used to read these sailing magazines, and I remember reading a story about this family of 4 had gone to the islands for their vacation, and next to them was one of the writers in the next slip, at the marina, was one of the writers for the magazine, and he was saying that it was like this incredible island sunset. He goes, the kind you only get in the islands. He goes, and he looked over, and all 4 family members, the kids who were like 10 to 12, and the parents were all on their devices. Their faces were in the screens, texting, scrolling through stuff. They weren't noticing the sunset, and that's a pretty sad commentary. This is the reason they came here, and none of them were talking. I recently had dinner at this place, and there were 3 people at the table next to me. They didn't say a word the whole time. They all had their faces in their phones. And if you don't recognize that you're not in control, that the phone is in control, that there's nothing. We have gotten to where I remember, because of my age, we had the old dialing phones. You had you would leave the house, nobody knew where you were. You would just go someplace, they didn't know where you were until you came home. Where did you go? Now, people have access to you. It's not just your friends and family, but it's the media. The media has access to you 24/7, and they know behavior. That's why, when you get a text alert, most people just can't resist going to see what the text is. They're not in control, and this is, there was a Nicholas Carr wrote a book called "What the Internet is Doing to Our Brain," and what is happening is, we're seeing this constant decline in our attention span. And, what he was saying is that we're asking our brains to process more data faster. And the brain is obeying that. It's evolving to be able to do that.
Well, the content's also evolving to do that. And that's part of my issue is I'm trying to have meaningful, substantial conversations. Can't do that in 20 seconds or less.
No.
And I find it so frustrating where I'm trying to be thoughtful. I'm trying to be meaningful. I'm trying to slow down and to be present. And I live in a world where I feel like I have to satisfy algorithms. Everything I do has to fit into a mold. And it drives me fucking crazy, and I feel like then now my conscience is if I don't if I don't march to the beat, if I don't do the dance that these algorithms tell me I have to do to be successful, am I going to fail? Because I want to be a human being, because I want to sit down and to listen to somebody and to take time to get to know someone's work and to be present and to, you know what I'm saying? There's so much. I just want to fucking be here, part of my language.
Yeah.
And I feel oh wait, I can't be here. I have to stop to show the world what I'm doing,
Right.
and to capture this moment. And if it didn't get captured on social media, did it happen?
Right.
Yeah.
And that's people have talked about that.
How are you present?
Right. That's
if
right.
that's what you have to do.
Right.
And this is why I'm I get that social media is important. I get that it opens doors to you, but I think that it's I don't know, what's the analogy to use? It's that's the ecosystem. Say the ecosystem is a ship, right? But there's a hole. The ship's going down, and we're going down with it. But we have to do it. You know what I'm saying? It's just what are we doing?
Well, I think we've lost respect of going back to the story I told about my daughter on the happy hour. I said, "You're not there. You're not there at having happy hour.
Yeah.
You're someplace else." And I remember. I actually had a psychiatrist once as a client who was telling me that he wanted to spend more time with his patients. But he had so much paperwork he had to do that he couldn't do that. So every now and then he would tell himself, "I'm going to spend another 10 minutes with this patient." But the whole time, in that 10 minutes, he was telling himself, "There's going to be hell to pay for this. I'm going to have all this paperwork to do." And I said, "You see, you're giving yourself permission to be there, but you're not there." And that's what you're talking about. People are not in the moment. They're not there because they're too busy documenting it, with their selfies and everything else, and
right.
being from a different generation, I don't care if you ate at this restaurant today. Like, it is not important to me. You know, like, and so that's why I think that it's, as you said, it's. I mean, they could say, "Well, I am being present because I'm showing everybody where I am right now."
Yeah, right.
But in reality, you're spending. You know, you're not talking to the person that's across the table from you.
So what are the downsides that I'm not aware of that you would like to bring to the conversation?
Well,
as far as
I
what we should
mean-
be aware of if we're, what are we sacrificing for?
Well, for one, we're as I started to say about Nicholas Carr's book. You know, he says that we're losing the ability to reel our mind in because our mind is being directed all day long. You know, by social media. Now you're going to think about this. Now you're going to think about that. And, now you're going to feel this. Now you're going to feel that. And when we sit down and we want to stop, like he said, he couldn't. He said, I used to be able to read for 5 hours. He goes, now I sit down and 10 minutes into them, I'm thinking, I need to go check my email.
Right.
Like, you can't be still. People have a real problem with just being still and being with their thoughts and being with themselves. Like, they feel like they're wasting time. They're always moving. Their hands are moving. So to me, it's when we allow social media to create our perspective of what's going on in the world.
Well, part of what I like the studying of human behavior, anthropology over time, how we evolve to be the way we are, psychological evolution, biological evolution, these types of topics. When you start looking into that stuff, and you think of like, well, how did we evolve to exist? And then you look at the world we live in today, and like, I just feel like, I don't know, it just feels like we're moving in the wrong direction to be happy. You know what I'm saying?
We are, Eric, and I think we need to talk about HeartMath for just a second because there's a lot of study in
Good
that.
transition.
Right.
Yeah.
And the reason is, as we said earlier, that the neurocardiologists have found that the heart really does most of the thinking, and the heart, you can't fake the heart out, which I think is interesting. In other words, the heart deals. It's directed. It's directly connected to who you are.
Would you say emotional intelligence is tied to the heart?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. But the heart, the heart puts out this electromagnetic field, and that field carries information. It's got data in it, and that data is who you are, what your concept of yourself is, how you feel about the conversation.
These are
you're having.
radio waves, or not radio waves, but
It's
rays
electromagnetic.
gamma waves.
Which works similar to a cell
Our
phone.
bodies produce electricity.
Absolutely, it
Yeah.
does. The body needs the electricity. So if you look at a cell phone,
Or Bluetooth.
a cell phone carries, when you have a phone conversation with someone, or you're texting them, or you're sending them a picture, that information is carried by an electromagnetic wave to the cell tower. That's how it moves. So the heart is doing the same thing. The heart has your information about you. Like, I'm feeling a little uncomfortable about this person. That information is in that electromagnetic, and it's going
That's
outside
the gut
of you.
feeling too, right?
Right.
So is your gut and your heart? Are there nerves in the gut too, or is this the same feeling?
It's the same. It's the same area. That's the reason why, when people go like, "This person creeps me out,"
It's your subconscious communicating to you. It's picking up on cues.
Well, it's the heart. I think the heart and the subconscious are probably tied together. But the point is that the brain, the mouth, can lie. Yeah, that's why you can lie. I mean, you can say whatever you want with your mouth, but the heart doesn't lie. The heart only goes with the truth.
Well, that's social intelligence. You don't want that person to know what you're thinking, because if you're wrong, you might create an awkward social situation, or you might you don't want to show your hand that you don't trust them.
Well, but the reason that how this becomes apparent is, many times you could be having a conversation with somebody and something doesn't feel right. That's because there's a conflict between what their heart is telling your heart and what their mouth is saying. They're two different things.
So your hearts are in communication.
Absolutely.
And there's a disconnect between what their mouth is saying and what
right.
So this is also body language too, which is why I love coming. Honestly, what you're discussing right now is why I like to be in person, because I know that I'm not getting those radio waves or those heart waves when I'm doing a Zoom call. I'm seeing from like here up. I don't see what your body, if you're I can't see your feet right now. The table's in the way. But when you can read not just the words that are coming out of the mind or the mouth, but when you can see what the body is saying, and when you can feel that their energy, there's just something about that.
Well, I think that why this is so important to understand is that as I said earlier, your neurosystem, my neurosystem is designed to be able to communicate with your neurosystem through this heart math. With the information that your heart is putting out, my heart is receiving, and it's interpreting it. So there could be a confusion or a disconnect between if you said something like if you didn't like me and you said, "Oh yeah, I really like you," well, your heart would be telling me you don't really like me because it doesn't lie. It only puts out the truth. But I think the reason that this is important is if you're getting this social media, and this social media is always creating fear within you, and then you are experiencing fear. That is what is going out into the energy field. Remember, I was talking about there's the ocean where there's trillions of us.
Yeah.
We don't realize that our the way that we think, all of us think, is going out. It's not private. We think because we can't hear it with our ears. Our ears have limitations, just like our eyes. Just because we can't hear something doesn't mean there's sounds above 20,000 hertz. We just don't hear them.
Just because a frog doesn't understand quantum physics, it's the same thing. There's certain things that we, at our current mental capacity, will just never understand or see because we don't have the tools to see or hear it.
Right, but it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Exactly.
And I think that what you're seeing now, like a good analogy, is the information that quantum physics is showing, what we're talking about here, where we are part of a collective energy field. And we are in that energy field. Now, electricity has been here since time began. We just didn't know about it until about 150 years ago, and then it was probably 50 to 60 years after that we really began to use it. And now you look at, we light the whole planet. Well, where are we without electricity? But the actual force, the energy force, has always been here. So what quantum physics is showing is that we are sending information into this field, and it has emotional content in it. And if 1 million people are afraid, and that is going out into the field, that is impacting the consciousness of the whole planet. And that sounds foo-fooey, but it is not. It's actually hard science, peer-reviewed science. So this is the stuff that with these new sciences that we're realizing is, and why I said in the book, what we have a responsibility to the future, to our kids, to our grandchildren, whatever. We have a responsibility to start to take control of what we're thinking and how we're feeling, because that is impacting the future.
And we literally have no control over what we're thinking right now because we're being manipulated, not persuaded, not sold, manipulated. When people don't know how you're influencing them, when they're unaware of how you're influencing them, it becomes manipulation. You
right.
know what I'm saying?
That's right. That's right.
And that's what's happening on all these social platforms. Like, they have agendas. There is a higher narrative that we are not aware of, and I just think it's maybe, but at the same time, maybe there could be an argument that the internet and the way we're more connected than ever before, but maybe it's going to allow us to do, I don't know, maybe there's like the futurists will say this is actually a good thing because it frees up human bandwidth to do more thoughtful work, like technology and automation and robotics. These aren't things to be feared. They're things that will make the quality of life better.
Well, it's a double-edged sword. I mean, if you look at the internet, you look at the heart math work and what we know from that. If we didn't have the internet, if we didn't have the ability to be on everybody's phone in everybody's house, who would know about it? Like a few people would know about it.
Yeah.
It's worldwide. I mean, they have people that they have stations around the world where they get, thousands of people to get together and meditate on peace in a specific area to send that energy into that area. So if we didn't have the same thing, that same technology, that is manipulating us, manipulation could be good, like if we're trying to bring peace into a certain area. So it's because maybe those people, they're not far enough along to realize that what they're doing is so detrimental.
Yeah. So how do I tie this to the restaurant industry? That's part of the things I have to do. I think there's a common overarching narrative right now where we're moving in this direction of being like restaurants have to be more digital. We have to think of that consumer who doesn't want to come into our restaurant and get that in-person experience. And there's opportunity there. There's like right now, if you are a brick and mortar and that's all you have is the 50 seats in your restaurant, that's your cap. You can only serve 50 people at a time. But if you open up your services to, digital, now it's as many people who want to order from you is your ceiling. You know, as many people who want to eat your food can order online, can get it delivered, can come pick it up. So the potential for earning is exponential when you open yourself up to that digital platform. But now there's also this narrative of like digital hospitality and being hospitable through these devices and through these different platforms and mediums, all the different mediums, email, TikTok, Facebook. You got to be everywhere. Yelp, you know? So where am I going with this is like, is it possible to be truly human and hospitable and genuine and be the best versions of ourselves through those mediums? Where what we just discussed, when you're in person, when you're next to people, there's a certain magic that's happening that we need to feel happy and healthy, to be seen. Are we losing that? Like, at what cost are we putting this energy? So if my mission statement is to inspire, empower, and transform the industry, what's that transformation look like? What's best? And if we can transform the industry, can we transform the world, is the question I'm asking myself.
Well, you know, some restaurants have an ambiance that you like, yeah, you can do takeout, but you don't want it. You want to go sit in the restaurant. And there's some around here that I go to. I think that it's kind of it has like, it's kind of, again, it's like a double-edged sword. With the digitizing, it opens people up to a lot more choices, you know, which means that the restaurants have more competition. And so what I feel like is, in order to function at your highest level, in any environment, whether it's hostile, manipulative, you know, or whatever, you have to understand how your mind works. What we're talking about here is mental performance technology, and that's exactly what it is. It's not hocus pocus voodoo. It's
mental performance technology.
Yeah, that's the way that I look at this. You know, we're understanding now. You know, if you go back to the Civil War,
science for sure.
Yes,
yeah.
Well, it is, and it has to do with mental performance. You know, like if you're not in control, you're not in control. But if you look at like the Civil War, you know, they were digging bullets out of guys and cutting and amputating the guy next to them with the same knife without cleaning it off, because they didn't know there was things like germs and bacteria. Right. Now we know that, so we don't do that stuff anymore. Yeah. You know, so now we're starting to look at this is the consequence of this thinking. Like this, if you're not in control of this is the consequence of it. But you do have the opportunity to be in control of it. So that's why I'm saying, like, to me, it's a very similar thing. It's like we have learned through our science what has been around for thousands of years in some of the Eastern thought traditions. But the point is like we have learned that you have more control than you ever imagined, and you either use that control. Like I've said, you know, I was talking in Vegas one time to a college golf coach. I said, you know, look, this is mental performance technology. Either your players use it, or they're going to get beat by the people that are using it. If you don't get involved in this stuff, if you don't learn what your potential is and how to control, you know, how to be the best person in the thing, how to think the most clearly, how to think at your highest level.
Yeah.
You know, that's what's at stake here.
Well, I think that's what the fear is for most people when it comes to getting involved with technology, like in social platforms, social media marketing, the evolution of marketing is, if I'm not doing that, I'm going to become obsolete, you know?
And that's part of...
And I think there's some truth to that.
I think there's some truth to it.
Which is scary, because only like 3 companies own that narrative. Like Google,
Absolutely.
Facebook, and TikTok. Like,
right.
That's too much power.
If they're censoring it, you know, like what gets out there and what doesn't, you know, that's the first.
But we just fold. You know, like we just accept the narrative. It's okay that they have all of our data.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think you're right if you just accept the narrative, but I don't see that. I see, like, you don't accept the narrative. There's other people like you.
I still have somebody that I'm, you know, having capture. Like, I choose to not be the one that's in it, but I recognize the importance that I'm willing to outsource it. I don't want to be a part of it, and I still have the apps on my phone because I like to see what people are saying and how the content's coming out, right? Like the work that Sam's producing. But like, I do push back, but I'm also fearful that if I'm not constantly making noise or outsourcing somebody to follow me around, that I might, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but that's kind of like. You know, there was a time, I remember my first computer for my business was like $4,000, you know, and it was a joke. You know, I mean, it had like, I think it had 20 megabytes of hard drive.
Yeah.
I was like crazy. Like,
yeah.
you know, and the thing is, what okay, well, I could sit around and do things on an index card, or I could get a computer. I mean, you had to be on a computer to be competitive. And so I don't know that it's the technology, it's how it's being used, because what you're putting out on social media could be,
I agree with that statement.
What you're putting out there could be very nurturing and wholesome.
Yeah.
And using the same technology, you're impacting millions of people. Whereas if you didn't have the technology, who would hear it?
Absolutely. And I do get that it's a double-edged sword, and I want to hear both perspectives because I want to open myself up to that perspective. But I do like to play these games, and I do want to talk to somebody about the world of and we got to start wrapping up. We're at our time. I am interested in learning more about HeartMath. That's in an industry where we're in the hospitality industry, and that's all about warmth, generosity, caring. It's all the heart stuff, right?
Right.
So
And if you're good, they have a reset that you can do, a heart reset that you can do, where they teach people, where like during the day they show like a person who gets overloaded with tasks, which can happen in the restaurant business, and that their thinking goes down, their decision making goes down, all these things go down. But if they practice this HeartMath thing, which only takes if you get what they call brain and heart coherence, where the two of them become in coherence with each other, then all that stuff shoots up. Your higher faculties open up, and so the reason is, like, if you learn that, it only takes I don't know, like 2 minutes or so to do. So you could do resets during the day. You can do it with your eyes open so nobody knows you're doing it.
This is called what? Heart reset?
Yeah, HeartMath reset.
HeartMath reset. I'm gonna make a note because I want to come back to it. Is there a person you know of that can speak to this? Like, who? Like, is it just, do I reach out to HeartMath and have them assign somebody to me? What's the best way?
Well, yeah. I mean, you could do research. Like I said, there are videos that talk about that and how you do it. So it really, if you're searching that, because they have put videos out there for that.
And you mentioned Carr, the gentleman that talks about the social media.
Nicholas Carr.
Carr. He's based in Charlottesville, I believe.
Oh, okay. All right.
Do you know him personally?
No, I don't know him personally. I just read the book.
Yeah, I'm looking to get him on the show. I'm hoping I can intercept him on my way back. I'm going to Charleston after this. So anyway, Tom, this has been a lot of fun, man. Thank you so much. I do want to give One Huddle one more nod, just because they helped me connect with you, and I am really interested in this company because they are really paying attention to the human. They are reverse engineering the human elements, but they're doing it for good.
Yes,
train. And
absolutely.
I think, like you said, that there are this is double-edged sword. Like, we're learning that technology can be used for good, but I think it's just so new that we just don't understand it yet. We don't know how to use it for good or bad. And I think this is one company that is leveraging technology to serve people.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really excited about what they're doing over there. So that's Sam Caiucci over at One Huddle. Thank you for this introduction and for supporting the show as a sponsor. And what can we do for you? What call to action do you want to get out? What do you want to leave our listeners with?
Well, I would like them, obviously, to buy, the books, because that kind of keeps me alive, But, but they can reach me. They can email me at tom@tomsterner.com. I do talk with people. I do come into companies and do presentations, where, I have some pretty nice presentations that I have done for all kinds of companies. So we're talking about this stuff today. But if somebody calls me and says, like, we've got all these project managers, and this is what we create as project managers, then I create a presentation for specifically tailoring this stuff for those people, so that it goes right into their wheelhouse, and how are you going to use this in your job. So I've done that. And I would say that's it. I mean, I coach people individually, and they can get a hold of me on the website, but that's probably it.
Yeah, beautiful. And I'm not sure what episode number this is. Let me just double check real quick. I believe it's gonna be episode 800. That's not right. We're in the 900s. I gotta scroll down. Jared, you know what to do. Sorry. This is episode number 986. Head over to restaurantunstoppable.com/986. We'll have a summary of today's discussion over there, as well as links to the books that we have here. It's The Practicing Mind, Fully, what's the second book? It's not in front of me.
Fully Engaged.
Thank you. Fully Engaged, and It's Just a Thought. I will have links to those books as well, to how to connect with Tom over there. Tom, just thank you so much, man.
Oh, man, my pleasure, Eric.
This was a really great chat.
Yeah,
there is no questioning. You are unstoppable.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.